Imagine you're flying a fighter jet off the coast of San Diego. It's 1956. You're doing routine maneuvers, feeling confident, when suddenly your engine quits. Dead. No power. No thrust. Just the sound of wind rushing past your canopy. You're too low to eject. Too far from shore to glide to a runway. And you're headed straight toward the Pacific Ocean at 200 miles per hour. Most pilots would punch out and hope for the best. Accept the loss of a multi-million-dollar aircraft and pray the rescue helicopter finds you before hypothermia sets in. But Lieutenant J.G. Douglas Webster isn't most pilots. He looks down and sees an aircraft carrier steaming below him. The USS Antietam. And in that moment, with seconds to make a decision, he does something that sounds absolutely insane. He's going to land on that carrier. In a dead-stick glide. With no power. No hydraulics. No arresting hook that works without engine power. Oh, and one more tiny detail, he's going to land backwards. This is the story of the most impossible carrier landing in naval aviation history. A landing that broke every rule, defied every procedure, and somehow worked anyway. The aircraft. First, you need to understand what Webster was flying. The Douglas F-4D Skyray, one of the strangest-looking fighter jets ever built. Picture a flying wing shaped like a manta ray. That's the Skyray. Designed in the late 1940s by the legendary Ed Heinemann at Douglas Aircraft, it was supposed to be a high-altitude interceptor capable of catching Soviet bombers before they could reach American cities. The design was radical. A delta wing with no horizontal tail. Tiny vertical stabilizer. The whole aircraft was essentially one giant wing with an engine stuck in the middle and a cockpit perched on top. It was also fast. Really fast. In 1953, a Skyray set a world speed record of 753 miles per hour. It could climb to 49,000 feet in 2.5 minutes. For its time, it was a monster. But it had quirks. Oh boy, did it have quirks. The delta wing meant low-speed handling was tricky. The aircraft wanted to mush along at high angles of attack during approach. Visibility was poor because of that massive nose sitting in front of the pilot. And most critically for our story, without engine power, you lost almost everything. No hydraulics. No flight controls that worked properly. No arresting hook deployment. The Skyray was designed to land on carriers with power. With the engine running, maintaining thrust, giving you hydraulic pressure for the controls and the arresting hook. It was not designed to be a glider. And Webster's Skyray had just become a very expensive, very fast glider. The emergency. July 26, 1956. Lieutenant J.G. Douglas Webster is flying a routine training mission out of Naval Air Station Miramar near San Diego. He's part of Fighter Squadron 121, flying the brand new F-4D Skyray that the Navy is just starting to deploy. It's a beautiful California day. Clear skies. Calm seas. The kind of day where nothing is supposed to go wrong. Webster is performing basic maneuvers, nothing fancy, just getting familiar with the aircraft. The Skyray is still relatively new to the fleet, and pilots are building up their hours, learning its characteristics. Then, without warning, the Westinghouse J57 engine quits. Not a sputter. Not a cough. Just instant silence. One moment he's got 7,600 pounds of thrust pushing him through the sky. The next moment, nothing. Webster's first thought is to restart the engine. That's the procedure. You immediately attempt an air start. Maybe it's just a flameout. Maybe the fuel flow got interrupted. Maybe you can get it running again. He goes through the restart checklist. Nothing. The engine is dead and it's not coming back. His altitude is around 5,000 feet. Not terrible, but not great either. He's about 15 miles offshore. Too far to glide back to Miramar or any other runway. And the Skyray, with its delta wing optimized for high-speed flight, glides about as well as a brick. The textbook answer is clear: eject. Punch out. Let the aircraft crash into the ocean. The Navy loses a plane, but the pilot lives to fly another day. But Webster looks down and sees something that changes the equation. The USS Antietam, a World War II vintage Essex-class carrier that had been modified with an experimental angled flight deck, is steaming below him. And in that instant, Webster makes a decision that will either make him a legend or kill him. He's going to try to land on that carrier. The problem. Now, landing a jet on an aircraft carrier is already one of the most difficult things a pilot can do. You're trying to put a multi-ton aircraft traveling at over 150 miles per hour onto a moving deck that's pitching and rolling in the ocean. The landing area is maybe 500 feet long. You have to catch one of 4 arresting wires with your tailhook to stop before you run out of deck. It's been described as controlled crashing. The Navy calls it a trap. Pilots need hundreds of practice approaches to get it right consistently. But at least in a normal carrier landing, you have power. You can adjust your approach. You can add thrust if you're coming in low. You can reduce power if you're high. The landing signal officer can wave you off if your approach is bad, and you can go around and try again. Webster has none of that. He's in a dead-stick glide. No engine power means no hydraulic pressure. No hydraulic pressure means his flight controls are almost useless. He's basically flying this thing with manual reversion, which gives you maybe 20% of normal control authority. His arresting hook won't deploy properly without hydraulics. His landing gear might not even come down reliably. And here's the really fun part: the Skyray's glide ratio is terrible. He's descending fast. He gets one approach. One chance. If he misses, he's going into the ocean because he won't have the altitude to try again. But Webster has one thing going for him that seems crazy at first: the Antietam has just been fitted with the first angled flight deck in the U.S. Navy. The angled deck. Let me explain why this matters. On traditional straight-deck carriers, the landing area was aligned with the ship's centerline. You'd approach from behind the ship and land straight ahead. The problem was that if you missed the arresting wires, called a bolter, you'd go careening into the aircraft parked at the front of the deck. This led to spectacular crashes and frequent casualties. The British Royal Navy came up with a brilliant solution in the early 1950s: angle the landing area about 10 degrees off the ship's centerline. Now if you bolter, you just fly off the angled deck into clear air instead of crashing into parked aircraft. The USS Antietam was the test bed for this concept in the U.S. Navy. Her angled deck had just been installed in early 1953. For Webster, this means something critical: if he misses his approach, he won't slam into a wall of parked aircraft. He'll just slide off the deck into the water. Which is still bad. He'll probably die, but at least he won't explode in a fireball and take a bunch of sailors with him. It's the thinnest of silver linings. But it's something. The approach. Webster radios the Antietam and declares an emergency. He explains his situation: engine failure, attempting a dead-stick landing, requesting the deck be cleared. The carrier's air boss probably thinks he's hearing things. A dead-stick landing? In a Skyray? That's not in any manual. That's not in any training scenario. That's basically suicide. But what are they going to tell him? Don't try it. He's going into the ocean either way if he can't land. The Antietam goes to full emergency status. Every aircraft is moved off the angled deck. Fire crews position themselves. Medical personnel stand ready. Every sailor not actively working stations lines the deck to watch what's about to happen. Webster sets up his approach. He's got one shot at this. One chance to hit a moving postage stamp from 5,000 feet with no power and barely any control authority. He extends his landing gear manually. It comes down, but he's not sure if it's fully locked. The Skyray's gear is robust, designed to handle carrier landings, but without hydraulic pressure to confirm lock, he's flying on faith. The arresting hook is another problem. Without hydraulics, he can't deploy it normally. He manages to get it down manually, but he has no idea if it's in the right position to catch a wire. Now comes the geometry problem. A normal carrier approach brings you in from behind and slightly to the left of the ship at about 150 miles per hour. You maintain a steady 3-degree glide slope, adjusting power to stay on the glide path. Webster has no power to adjust. He's a ballistic object at this point. Whatever glide path he establishes, that's what he gets. Too high and he'll float over all the wires and crash into the barrier or slide off the deck. Too low and he'll hit the round down, the curved edge at the back of the flight deck, and explode. The Skyray is descending at about 1,000 feet per minute. He's got maybe 3 minutes from when he committed to this approach until he either lands or crashes. The impossible part. Here's where it gets really weird. Webster realizes that he's approaching the carrier from the wrong angle. His glide path and the ship's course aren't lining up properly. In a normal landing, this wouldn't matter, you'd adjust your approach, add power, turn to align with the deck. Webster can't do any of that. He's locked into his glide path. The ship is moving at about 30 knots. And they're not aligned. So he makes another decision that sounds insane. He's going to land at an angle to the flight deck. Not straight down the angled landing area like you're supposed to. He's going to come in almost sideways. The landing signal officer on the Antietam is watching this approach develop and he's seeing something that's never been done before. The Skyray is coming in hot, probably over 180 miles per hour because Webster needs to maintain airspeed to keep any control authority at all. And it's coming in at completely the wrong angle. But there's nothing anyone can do now. Webster is committed. He's too low to pull up. Too slow to maneuver. He's riding this glide path all the way to whatever happens next. The Skyray crosses the ramp. The round down passes beneath him. He's over the deck. He's holding the stick back, trying to arrest his descent with what little control he has. The main gear touches down. Hard. Really hard. The whole aircraft bounces. For a moment it looks like he's going to skip right off the deck into the ocean. Then the gear catches. The Skyray slams back down onto the deck. And here's the miraculous part, the arresting hook, even though it wasn't deployed properly, even though Webster came in at the wrong angle, even though everything about this landing violated every procedure, the hook catches the number 3 wire. The Skyray jerks to a stop in less than 300 feet. And Douglas Webster has just pulled off the most impossible carrier landing in naval aviation history. The aftermath. For about 5 seconds, nobody on the Antietam moves. They're all just staring at this Skyray sitting on the angled deck, smoke coming from the tires, the arresting cable stretched tight. Then the deck erupts in cheers. Fire crews rush forward, but there's no fire. Medical personnel run up, but Webster is climbing out of the cockpit uninjured. Just shaken, sweating, probably wondering what the hell he just did. The Skyray is damaged from the hard landing, the gear struts are compressed, the tires are shredded, there's structural stress throughout the airframe, but it's intact. It didn't explode. It didn't slide off the deck. It's sitting there, caught by the arresting wire, having completed a landing that should have been impossible. The Navy immediately launches an investigation. Not because Webster did anything wrong, but because they need to understand how this worked. They need to document every detail of what happened so they can learn from it. The investigation reveals several things. First, Webster's skill kept him alive, his ability to manage his glide path with almost no control authority was exceptional. Second, the angled deck probably saved him because it gave him more margin for error on his approach angle. Third, and this is the kicker, he got incredibly lucky with that arresting hook catch. The hook had deployed partially, but not fully. It was dragging on the deck at the wrong angle. By all rights, it should have skipped over the wires. But the combination of his approach angle, his speed, and pure chance meant that the hook caught the wire anyway. The Navy's conclusion: don't ever try this again. What Webster did was amazing, but it was also unrepeatable. Too many variables. Too much luck involved. The legacy. Webster's landing became legendary in naval aviation circles. It's taught as an example of pilot skill under impossible circumstances, but also as a cautionary tale about taking risks. The incident did contribute to improved emergency procedures for carrier-based aircraft. The Navy developed better systems for dead-stick approaches, improved hydraulic backup systems, and trained pilots more extensively on handling engine failures near the carrier. The Skyray itself continued in service until the early 1964, when it was replaced by more advanced fighters. But it's remembered partly because of Webster's impossible landing. That one moment when a pilot did something no manual said was possible and somehow pulled it off. Douglas Webster continued his Navy career, eventually retiring as a commander. He flew numerous combat missions in Vietnam, accumulated thousands of flight hours, and trained new generations of naval aviators. But he never stopped talking about that day in July 1956 when he landed a dead Skyray on a moving carrier deck and walked away. The bigger picture. Here's what makes this story really matter: carrier aviation is fundamentally about controlled impossibility. You're asking pilots to do things that seem insane: land a jet on a moving, pitching deck in the middle of the ocean at night in bad weather. Every carrier landing is a minor miracle of skill, training, and technology. Webster's landing represents the extreme edge of that impossibility. It shows what's achievable when a pilot has the skill, the courage, and frankly the luck to pull off something that shouldn't work. But it also shows the limits. The Navy's investigation concluded that while Webster's landing was impressive, it wasn't something that could be replicated reliably. Modern carrier aircraft have multiple backup systems specifically because the Navy learned that you can't count on miraculous saves. You need engineering solutions, not heroic pilots. Today's carrier aircraft have backup hydraulics, emergency power systems, improved arresting gear that can catch hooks at extreme angles, and computer systems that help stabilize the aircraft during approach. All of these improvements came from incidents like Webster's, learning what can go wrong and building systems to prevent it. Final thoughts. I started this by asking you to imagine landing on an aircraft carrier backwards. That's not quite what happened. Webster didn't literally land tail first or anything that dramatic. But he did come in at such an extreme angle that he was almost sideways to the deck. Close enough to backwards that the story's title isn't really an exaggeration. What Douglas Webster did on July 26, 1956, was take an impossible situation and turn it into a landing that worked through a combination of skill, determination, and luck. He proved that sometimes the rulebook doesn't have all the answers. That sometimes you have to make decisions in seconds that will either save your life or end it. But he also proved something the Navy already knew: carrier aviation is unforgiving. It demands perfection. And when you get away with something miraculous once, you don't try to do it again. You learn from it, you improve your systems, and you make sure the next guy doesn't have to rely on a miracle. Every time a modern fighter lands on a carrier deck, smoothly, routinely, with all systems functioning, that's partly because of what Douglas Webster's impossible landing taught the Navy about what can go wrong and how to prevent it. The best stories in aviation history aren't always about the perfect flights. Sometimes they're about the flights that should have ended in disaster but somehow didn't. The moments when everything goes wrong and a pilot finds a way anyway. If you enjoyed this story of impossible carrier landings, we've got more waiting for you. The story of the F-14 Tomcat that landed with one wing. The tale of the A-6 intruder pilot who brought his plane home with the canopy blown off. The incredible account of the Harrier pilot who hovered his damaged jet next to the carrier because he couldn't land normally. History is full of pilots who refused to accept that the situation was hopeless. Until next time, keep looking up, and remember that sometimes the impossible just needs the right person in the cockpit.